the Radical Secular Podcast, dedicated to the separation of church and state and the pursuit of justice.
Welcome to the Radical Secular Podcast. I'm Sean Prophet.
I'm Christoph Defoe.
This week we bring you a special guest who's a profile in courage. Her name is Coral Anika Theill. She spent 14 years from 1982 to 1996 in a series of abusive cults, starting with the People of Praise. Her 8 children were held hostage by the cult. After granting her a temporary protective order, the Oregon courts ultimately sided with her husband and the People of Praise and separated her from her children, including her youngest, who was still a nursing infant. We really can't wait to bring you this interview. I feel so inadequate trying to summarize this painful story into a show teaser. We'll get it straight from the person who lived it in just a few minutes. But first, the news. We want to spend maximum time with our guests, so we'll do an abbreviated news segment today about the only thing worth discussing this week is the Senate impeachment trial and acquittal of former President Trump. So we'll talk about that. This just happened just minutes before our taping today. The vote happened, and it was 57 in favor of conviction and 43 against, and so he was acquitted. I want to remind you, please, to be sure and subscribe to our podcast. We're on YouTube and all the major podcast channels. New episodes post every Monday at noon Eastern Time. If you like our show, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and tell your friends to listen. Which brings us to our big announcement today. Our brand spanking new website, theradicalsecular.com, which was put together with much love by Christoph and our resident designer, Tim Stetner. This website is our one-stop shop where you can sign up to get on our email list and also enjoy our full content library. You can also find the Radical Secular blog, and we'll be posting updates in the future about how you can get involved and support our efforts toward secularism and justice. So tell us more about the website, Christoph.
Yeah, sure. It's a labor of love. I had to learn how to put a website together. Certainly, Tim was really helpful and instrumental in terms of our branding, as always. But we have, but it's relatively basic. But I think it looks good. We can get all of our stuff is there. All of our episodes. You can sign up to become part of the Radical Secular sort of club. We're going to be doing a lot of things with it going forward. So, and there's also links for you to subscribe to everything. So I think it's pretty cool. I think it's pretty fun. I am very proud of it. And, check it out, everybody.
Yeah, thanks for that, Christoph, and for all your hard work. And here's how to find us.
Visit our website at theradicalsecular.com and sign up for free access to exclusive content and giveaways, our full library of episodes, and articles at the Radical Secular blog. Email us with your comments and suggestions, and follow us on social media.
All right, let's talk about the impeachment trial. Holy shit.
I mean, what is there even to say? Right out of the gate, I want to say that as I was thinking about this impeachment trial, I thought about it in a lot of ways, the same ways I thought about the last one, which was that I knew the outcome was never in doubt, right? So it almost felt like insulting to even watch it, right? It's like this. I mean, I'm really glad it happened, but my initial reaction was like, I don't even want to fucking watch this thing. I know what's going to happen. And I know Josh Hawley is going to be up there fucking literally doodling or with his feet up. And so, but still, when I watched the video, when I heard the opening statement, it was very powerful. It brought me right back to January 6th in a way that I didn't even realize I had sort of forgotten, or that it had sort of receded. And so like the feeling that I had that day had sort of receded, and it was like right back. And of course, some of the images were we saw news stuff, and mainly the stuff that I heard, right? Like, fuck the police, kill the police. Where's Mike Pence? Like these years, like, oh my God, these people.
Nancy. Nancy. That stuff
was terrifying.
It was a horror movie.
Yeah,
it was a complete horror movie. And what I think was important about doing that is it was being read into the historical record for the nation. And that is why I think the House impeachment managers did such a good job, because they were speaking as American patriots, as statesmen, as who we used to be. Mm-hmm. And if we had a decent country at this point, he would have been convicted unanimously.
Yeah, definitely. It was so important for all the reasons you said, right? Because, and I read this recently, this week in response to this, and that is when we forget, right? When we turn a blind eye, when we sort of paper over what happened in the past, the horrible things that happened, we are ensuring that they happen again in the future, right? And the Civil War, the way the Civil War ended in the end of Reconstruction and then the restructuring of the narrative around states' rights is why we are here right now, right? The reason why we are sitting here talking about an insurrection is because the last insurrection wasn't taken seriously. And that's why we're still here, you know? So this is so important to read this into the record and know that, look, so that for posterity, it'll be there for posterity. Also, this also took the final unmasking of the GOP is complete.
Yes.
Right? But now they are on record. They are on record being okay with insurrection, with not holding their guy accountable purely for political reasons. They stand for nothing now, and it's obvious, but power.
Yeah, the fig leaf has been completely just ripped away. And I was really actually happy that, you know, it's kind of like there was a couple of people who were on the fence. The initial vote for the constitutionality of the trial was 55-45.
Right.
And then there was another vote that happened where there was an additional someone else. What was that vote? Anyway, it was then 56, right? And then for conviction, 57. So we had a progression where you saw a couple of people find their spine and their conscience, and I can't name them right now because, again, this just happened before our taping. So
that's important. That's really important. And what I heard, Marco Rubio is one of the most pathetic men, not even in the Senate, but
he was the deciding vote. He was the deciding vote.
Yeah. And he is such a piece of garbage, right? And such a spot. He's like him and Paul Ryan. Remember Paul Ryan from the ages ago? The spinelessness of these men, right? The kowtowing to power is astonishing with these guys. But, you know, I saw him interviewed. I think he went on Fox or whatever. Of course, it was Fox. And he was saying, like, look, it was horrible. Right, the way that the House impeachment managers laid out the course, they boxed off any reasonable defense. Right, they anticipated every deflection, every defense that that any Republican could have come up with, and so at the end, the Republicans could only say, "Well, we just didn't want to convict a private citizen." They hung their hat on the constitutionality issue because there is literally no substantive defense. There is no substantive defense to this.
Especially the thing that came out last night, which was that Kevin McCarthy had called Trump and said, "Hey, call off your dogs." And Trump was like, "Well, I guess there's a lot of people who are a little more upset about the election than you are." You know, little weasel. And Kevin McCarthy actually said to the president, "Who the fuck do you think you're talking to?" Which was awesome. I mean, awesome. Can you imagine?
Can you imagine saying that to the president of the United States, right? And look, it was just so damning. And Mitch McConnell, can we talk about Mitch McConnell for a second? He's just a craven piece of garbage. Because guess what? I was just, right before we went on, I went and looked at my notifications, and he has come out with a scathing speech, just against Donald Trump. Now that he voted to acquit, a scathing speech, and it's just like, so he wants to have it both ways, right? Yeah. He wants to have it both ways. So now his base, who are low information voters, right? They will say, "Oh, well, McConnell voted to acquit, so he's fine." But meanwhile, everyone else who really pays attention to the news will be able to hear McConnell saying, "Oh, Trump is this, the mob, I'm a frog." You know what I mean? I said this before, I'll say it again, is the real threat to democracy is Mitch McConnell. That is the threat to democracy. Trump was obviously a huge threat in a different way, but the fundamental, lasting, long-term threat to democracy are men like Mitch McConnell.
Absolutely. And the very fact that the Senate, this goes all the way back. I was furious and ranting in the past few days about this situation because a lot of people are going, oh, we're legitimizing a coup attempt, this kind of thing. But the fact is, this all goes back to the Constitution. We are dealing with the consequences of having a constitution that allows minority rule. We have the Senate you can't do it. 20% of the population of the U.S. can get you 40 votes in the Senate.
Yep.
And if you're in that situation when you have a filibuster, that means 20% of the population can block any progress. And so that goes back to the founding fathers. And when you look at it, where their sympathies really were, it was with white landowners and slave owners. And we are still dealing with it. We will never fix it until we get past that. And people like Mitch McConnell are just, they are standing athwart history.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And people like Mitch McConnell, these like hanging their hats on procedure instead of substance, right? I mean, we go on and on and on about how terrible this guy is. I mean, think about the bad faith, right? And we talk about it all the time. You said this week, right? Like, why talk about bad faith? We all know that these people are in bad faith, and that is important. And I think that, right, the key is, how do we act on this instead of like flipping out with outrage every single time that there's bad faith? Because of course there's bad faith. I mean, this man said the argument is that it's not constitutional to not. I'm laughing because it's so comical. It's not constitutional to impeach an ex-president, but when he had the opportunity to do it during the president's term, he refused to do it. So it's like, I mean, come on.
This was Republicans have been terrified of Trump for 4 years because initially all those people, Rubio, McConnell, all those people denounced Trump when he first ran. As soon as he got the power, they flipped on the other side. But he has been a thorn in their side, the primary threat to primary anyone who doesn't toe the line. And this was an off-ramp for them because it wasn't about, right? It wasn't about removing him from office. It was about, as soon as you got the 67 votes to convict, you could have 51 votes to make sure he could never run again. Exactly. And they wouldn't do it.
They wouldn't do it. And you know what? This is really interesting. And this is something that is really endemic in our culture right now. You see it in our economy, in our culture. It's this short-term thinking, right? It's like, so they are thinking in the 5 minutes in front of their face. Right? That's it. And the same thing with stock buybacks. It's the same thing with the way that basically it all comes down to how this quarter does, right? Not how the company is going to be doing in 5 years. Literally this quarter. That's what we think about. So and when we think this way, the entire GOP thinks this way. And so they don't think that, like, look, if we purge Trumpism from our party right now, sure, we're going to lose a couple cycles of elections, but but eventually we can become a normal center-right party, and we can start peeling off conservative Democrats, right? The independents, right? There's a lot of people who won't vote for Republican right now who would happily vote for a center-right party. They don't like the liberals and the left and the Democrats. They don't like any of that. They would be happy to vote for the party of Reagan again. They would be happy to, but these people cannot look more than 5 fucking minutes in front of their face. And so the fact that they might lose in 2022, they can't do it.
Here's what's going to happen. I mean, I told a couple people today that in the last week or so that I'm really getting out of this long-term speculation business because, we can argue all day long about what's going to happen or what won't happen with the Republican Party or the nation for that matter. And it doesn't do us any good. What I do know is what it's going to take for us to win. If we really want to overturn this stuff, we're going to have to go right after this minority rule business. And that means voting rights. That means, voting rights is the key. That's the number one. And that also means we're going to have to figure out how to get more senators, possibly overturn the Electoral College through, these efforts to grant the votes of a state to the person who wins the national popular vote. There's ways that we can do it, end runs around the Constitution, because we're never going to amend it. That's right. So this is what we have to do to win. I'm not going to say what is going to be the outcome, though, because they're going to try to block this at every turn. And so what I think we will see in the next couple of years is just that there's going to be a ton of both criminal and civil lawsuits criminal charges and civil lawsuits filed against Republicans, against Donald Trump, against his family. And a lot of the stuff that happened over the last 4 years is going to get kind of resolved in the next 4. And we're going to see, I mean, Nikki Haley has backed away from Trump now, and we're going to see more people backing away from Trump. And if we can do okay, if Democrats can hold the line in the 2022 elections, then we might have a chance.
Yeah. Well, this is to piggyback on what you're saying is that, as I like to say, I'm here for it. Right. So I say that a lot, is that, like, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm not in the prediction business, but I do know that whatever it is, I'm going to be here for it. I don't think that these problems, the problems that we're going to be talking about in our guest segment, the problems that we're talking about right now, these problems are not going away tomorrow. They're not going away during my life. So I'm just here for it right now. And what we can do in the most granular sense, vote blue, no matter who, your entire fucking life, all the way up and down the ballot. That's it, right? That is the number one thing that the average Joe can do without any qualification, Sean, not even one qualification. It doesn't matter if they're blue, you vote for them. That's it. That's it.
That's the deal. And by the way, no attacking our own either. Like, I don't really give a fuck what Andrew Cuomo did, right? He's a good Democrat. And we need to stick together, because if these motherfuckers can acquit Trump, then we can goddamn well stand behind Andrew Cuomo.
Exactly. And we can stand behind these guys and these women, and we have to. And it's not because we necessarily agree with everything they did, but because we have a two-party system, and one party is dramatically better than the other. That's it. That's it. And pure utilitarianism. That's it.
We're going to hear the stakes right now, because that kind of does it for our news segment. And we're going to get right into our main guest segment with Coral Anika Theill. She spent 5 years from 1979 to 1984 as a handmaid or helpmeet in an abusive headship marriage in the People of Praise cult. Her husband dragged her through a series of 7 more patriarchal fundamentalist Christian cults over the next 15 years. I mean, this is tyranny, folks. This is fucking tyranny in the United States of America. You will not believe this interview, okay? Her 8 children were held hostage by her husband with the support of the various cult groups and their enablers, which are all patriarchal, male-dominated, male supremacist, violent groups masquerading as Christianity. And so she finally got out in 1999 after experiencing marital sexual assault, intimidation, and threats. She changed her name. She went into hiding in the Oregon State Address Protection Program. According to Tim King, editor of the Salem News, the story of Coral Anika Theill is one of the most flagrant, outrageous examples of small-town injustice in America. And so we'll learn a little bit about this. The People of Praise is mostly a Catholic group that also admits members from other Christian faiths. It operates 22 branches in the US and Canada, as well as in the Caribbean, and it has an estimated 1,700 members. Founded in 1971, the group has its headquarters in South Bend, Indiana. Its members adhere to the Catholic covenant philosophy and the Nicene Creed. Women and children are required to submit to their spiritual head, which is, of course, the man of the household. Ms. Theill has been writing and speaking about her experiences for the past 2 decades. She's been the subject of countless articles and made dozens of appearances on broadcast media and numerous podcasts. In 2003, she published the first edition of her memoir entitled Bon Shia, Making Light of the Dark, which is available on Amazon in both Kindle and paperback. She gained national prominence in 2020 when she sought to testify at the Senate hearings for recently confirmed Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett, who is also a member of the People of Praise. So, without further delay, The Radical Secular presents Coral Anika Theill. Welcome to The Radical Secular, Coral. We couldn't be more pleased to have you on our show.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be with you.
Yeah, let's get into the T-shirts. Coral, what's on your shirt?
Well, I couldn't find my shirt, but I do have a Mothers of Lost Children T-shirt that I wore in front of the White House in a silent prayer vigil in 2010.
Oh, I think I saw a picture of that. Well, I have got on a Darwin shirt because it was Charles Darwin's birthday yesterday, and which is also Abraham Lincoln's birthday. And as you can see, at the end of the evolutionary chain, we throw religion in the trash. So that's what's on my shirt. What do you got, Christoph?
In a similar vein, I have my Crossbuster Bad Religion t-shirt. Bad Religion is my favorite band of all time and really got me on the path, along with some of Sean's early writings, getting out of the cult, really got me on the path towards secularism and towards atheism and towards sort of freedom from that mentality. And the Crossbuster is just classic Bad Religion. And it doesn't seem like a big deal now, I guess, but if this was in 1980 when this shirt with this symbol was created, it was a big fucking deal.
Yes.
And there it is. I love that.
And
so, all right, Coral, I want to start with a quote by Alexander Solzhenitsyn that you used in your book. And this is a great quote. It says, "To do evil, a human being must first of all believe that what he's doing is good. Ideology or religion, that is what gives devil doing its long-sought justification and gives the evildoer the necessary steadfastness and determination. That is the social theory which helps to make his acts seem good instead of bad in his own and others' eyes, so that he won't hear reproaches and curses, but will receive praise and honors." And your story, which has at its core the very same pathologies that we discuss every week here on the Radical Secular, was really made possible by both religion and the hierarchical right-wing political ideology. Fundamentally, if you look at all of its manifestations of human evil, where are they? Where do they most effectively hide? Within powerful organizations and institutions that are well respected as bastions of maintaining the common good. And that is churches, charities, cops, CEOs, the justice system, and the government itself, our elected representatives. I mean, all these people are supposed to be respectable. Now, I'm not talking about petty thugs and sloppy small-time criminals. I'm talking about people who commit repeated and systematic acts of gross injustice, violence, child rape, Medicare fraud, bribery, buying politicians, systemic corruption on a grand scale. When scandals break, and they break just about every week, who are these people? Many of them were formerly highly respected in the community. They could be well-to-do professionals or businessmen. They could be archbishops, stake presidents in the Mormon church, megachurch pastors, or judges or politicians. Now, I'm certainly not saying that all powerful people are automatically corrupt. There's plenty of good people in all of these roles. What I'm saying is that if you're intent on getting away with doing great harm, this is where you would hide, in plain sight behind the facade of wealth and power and respectability. And this reminds me of another Solzhenitsyn quote that I've always loved that helps explain the complicity of ordinary people when facing the evil of a powerful person. We find, shockingly, as in your story, that many times, many people will actually prefer, almost by default, to side with the abuser or criminal and not want to see the accused person's life ruined. So I've seen it over and over again that rather than identify with a victim, people look at an abuser who has a position of wealth and privilege, and they often just straight up come out and say it. We shouldn't ruin this person's life based on the testimony of one victim. We heard this during the Brett Kavanaugh confirmation hearings, and we've heard this countless times. So Christoph and I often describe this as the just world fallacy, which is one of the prime tools used in victim blaming, whether it's for poverty or violence or neglect or abuse. But let me read another quote, because I believe this has everything to do with why you didn't get the help you needed when facing down your abuser in court. This is from Solzhenitsyn again. "If only it were all so simple, if only there were evil people somewhere insidiously committing evil deeds, and it were necessary only to separate them from the rest of us and destroy them. But the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being. And who is willing to destroy a piece of his own heart?" So, Coral, I'm sure you've heard this quote before. It's a tragic commentary on the human condition.
Yes. And you're right. There was no justice in my case, and every victim does long for justice and vindication and restitution. But I find a lot of the religious people, the Christians, Catholics, they did side with my abuser, my rapist. And Judith Herman, in her book, Trauma and Recovery, speaks about this a lot. It's one of my favorite books, and I recommend that to all of your audience, Trauma and Recovery by Judith Herman, MD. And she speaks about how you can't really be sitting on the fence. You have to choose sides. And most times people choose the perpetrator, the predator, because the predator doesn't ask for anything. But we need compassion. We need help. there's a lot the victim will need in seeking justice. So it's really easy to side with the predator. They don't ask for anything.
Right, right. Well, let's start with the basics here. I gave a brief description of the People of Praise cult in the intro, but what we're here to talk about today isn't anywhere near just about People of Praise. This is more the story of your life and the whole constellation of sexual trauma, religious abuse, domestic violence, and really conscious systematic torture at the hands of the patriarchy that frankly almost killed you. I mean, I read your story. It's so hard to read because you almost died. And you should have been a free citizen of the United States of America with liberty and justice for all, and instead you were essentially kept as a prisoner by your own family in conditions that in some cases were as bad as what Solzhenitsyn endured in a Soviet prison camp. It's just a completely shocking story that strains the boundaries of our understanding that something like this could have occurred right here in the US, right under our noses in modern times during our lifetime in the state of Oregon. So
yes.
We want to hear the story from you from the beginning. I hope you're not tired of telling it because it just needs to be told.
And my own story shocks me too. Even preparing for this today and to speak about it out loud is traumatizing. But I'm thankful for both of you for this program that you help raise the consciousness in our society. We do need to speak about these things and loudly and forever. And we need to share our voice so that others that don't have a voice yet or those who are gone, that we will be their voice. I just wanted to share one point too, that I choose not to participate in the silence that protects perpetrators and isolates survivors. And we do need to stop shaming and blaming victims. And our society is so good at that. And but did you want me to start with my childhood?
Well, yeah, let's start with your childhood, and because again, you don't just suddenly wind up in one of these groups, right? So I just kind of want to trace the lineage of how this happened through your life. And did you have a normal childhood, or did you go to a public school, or would you go to a religious school? What was it like?
No, not normal. My childhood, I was born in Michigan. My father was a captain in the Air Force, and then I spent a lot of my childhood and young adult life near McCord Air Force Base in Washington. We moved there when I was 3 years old. My father had some health problems when I was around 6 or so years old, so we moved to Kennewick, Washington, where my grandparents had a home where we could live in it for rent-free while he was getting through his health issues. He then got better, but at the same time, my life revolves around my great uncle, Herschel Stonebreaker. And he in 1955 executed his 16-year-old daughter in front of his wife, her sisters, and the boyfriend. I looked up his court records. I do research, and my story is well documented, but I did find his testimony in court that he said that she deserved it. He did get life. He was at the Walla Walla State Prison, and I remember as a young girl, we were visiting him often, and I was just told it was where he worked. And it was not a good place to bring a young child. I was 5 and 6 at the time, and we were in the waiting room with all the couples. But Walla Walla State Prison was where I met my uncle and where I thought he worked, and my family adored him. My father was his favorite uncle. My grandmother was her favorite brother. And when I was in elementary school, he was let out. He did not have to do his full prison term of life. He had also raped all his 3 daughters, but he got out because of our family support. Probably spent maybe 6 or so years in prison. And
6 years.
6 years.
Yeah, he lived with us. We were in Kennewick, Washington. He was not to be around young daughters or girls. He was not to be around his ex-wife or daughters, but this is what happened. He lived with us, and I think his parole officer was missing in action. But my mother was not probably narcissistic, sociopathic, and I believe she hated me as a young child. I was a girl. I did have a brother. He was very entitled in our family, but because me just being a female, I believe her hate started at a very young age to me. And she my grandmother and mother put me in the bedroom with my great uncle nearly every night. And my uncle was also alcoholic. he threatened me, and that's where my life started. And a lot of it ended there. At that time, I lost my voice and my identity before it ever begun. But I survived that. I believe there's a red X that's on your forehead that predators can see when you have survived those kind of experiences. And even as an adult now, I'm learning still to be assertive. But that did lead a lot into my young adulthood and marriage, that experience. And at the time, I remember even my uncle wanting to date his ex-wife. And then within weeks, I remember as a young child feeling shocked because I heard his ex-wife burned in a house fire, a mysterious house fire. So there were a lot of things going on. And even when my uncle murdered his daughter, my grandmother protected him and hid him from the police. And so that was the beginning. And then my young adulthood, we were living in Auburn, Washington, and renovating an old farmhouse. And he came to live with us because he was alcoholic at that time. And my father invited him. And I was in my junior high years. And I remember picking up the call. And it just made me shake. And I believe, you're not able to piece what happened. You just know you're incredibly terrified of someone. And he came to live with us. I had to take care of him while he was going through cleaning up from alcoholism. And that was very traumatizing for me. My grades went down and I couldn't understand what was going on, but I do as an adult now. And then we moved from there, and my father was a pilot again in Vancouver, Washington. And I was co-valedictorian in my high school class. It was expected I get straight A's. My father and mother expected me to be a pilot at a young age. And I paid for my pilot instruction in ground school at age 17 and soloed within maybe 8 hours at the Pearson Air Park in Vancouver, Washington. And then after graduation, I began court reporter school. There was a part of me that was, maybe the intelligence part was going well, but the whole emotional identity part had been murdered. I believe it's soul murder when you rape children. And so my whole childhood with my mother, especially my father was gone a lot as a pilot, but she'd throw Bibles at me in the middle of the night. I was her personal slave. I did support my parents when my father was ill by splitting wood and keeping them in their home. And I just really didn't have a childhood. It was just working for them and then raped for years as a child and then just great expectations, not a lot of sleep, and a lot of brutality, a lot of beatings as a young child too that were somewhat forced. I think my mother enjoyed watching my grandfather beat me, but that was the beginning. And it wasn't until I collapsed at age 38 that I began to put the pieces together. And in my book, I share that my collapse, it was horrifying. It was extremely painful, but I was able to start putting pieces together. And I am thankful for that. It started my life anew, and it also was the end of any other life I'd had up to then. But my marriage, I don't know if you want me to go into meeting.
Well, I want to talk about, and I just wanted to say, it's just a horrific story that your own family would put you in with a convicted killer, and while knowing that he was also a sexual abuser. It's
on purpose.
How does it happen? On purpose.
On purpose. I mean, it's hard to wrap one's mind around that, and just how a mother, you're a mother, right? How one could allow anybody, but certainly a child, to go through that. And really remarkable, and I just want to talk about this briefly, is that, a pilot's license, valedictorian, like these sort of amazing accomplishments, I think is just a testament to your inner strength that perhaps you didn't realize you had at that time. But clearly, in retrospect, wow, what an inner strength.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, about my mother, some people, they can't understand my grandmother and mother, but some people, and sharing with me, some of my mentors, we've talked about it. I think my grandmother wanted to save her brother from going back to prison, so I might have been given to him to keep him home. They knew what he was most likely doing. That's what I thought. I don't know where his parole officer was, but And then later, when I was writing my book, I did go to Kennewick. I did meet my mother and grandmother at that time in 96 or in 98. I started writing and starting to piece things together. It's hard. You continue to piece things together all your life. There's no end to that journey. So that's why I live in radical amazement, even being both of you today. This is wonderful. And I did not know that years ago. But I went to the city, and some people told me in Kennewick that my uncle had actually raped another girl, and he was in court. And my grandmother got him a really good attorney, and he didn't have to go back to prison. But that was the same time they were putting me in his room. And so it didn't keep him from harming other girls, but they also kept putting me in his room. And then the only other thing I found out, too, as a young adult, my father was alone with me one time when my mother traveled to visit her relatives, and he told me that his marriage was set up, that my mother forced him to marry her. She said she was pregnant. She wanted to marry a pilot, and she wasn't. They didn't have me for 3 more years. So their marriage was started in a lie. And I think because my father did love me as a child, that created a jealousy. She was a very unwell person. And so a lot of these dynamics were created through that.
I see.
Did you ever get any acknowledgement, like when you said you went back to talk to them, did you ever get any acknowledgement from your mother or any sort of apology?
No, I even wrote them while I was publishing my book and just shared, my counselors can't help me. There's nothing anyone can say. And this would have to be from you. And they both wrote me and said they were not sorry. And even on my mother's deathbed, I did stop seeing her and contacting for 10 years. 10 years, she died 10 years ago, but up from the time of my divorce, I just knew she would call me and tell me everything was my fault because I didn't obey her enough and I wasn't serving her. And was I reading my Bible? Did I believe in Jesus? And it was just a lot of mental abuse. And then I just told her one time, Mom, this is our last call. And I just wish you all the best. And I have nothing against her. I hope for everybody's highest good. But when there's a toxic person, a dangerous person around you, I just tell everybody, all victims, safety, safety, safety first.
Mm-hmm. You got to draw the
first, and then
boundary.
Go work on the other. But yeah, I did talk to them. I talked to my mother at the end. She'd always say she loved me. And then I talked to her about this too, once again. And she just said she wasn't sorry. And I was on the phone when she was dying in the hospital. I took the high road. My doctors and mentors were very concerned about that. They said, don't let her take you to the grave. But I don't know if I do that again, but I was there for her. But, I always knew throughout my childhood, it was kind of like the Carrie movie and Mommy Dearest, just throwing things at me in the middle of the night, screaming at me. She wasn't a well person. And she'd always tell me, I'm taking her out of my will. I mean, she said this even as a child. So I did work for them. I built them homes. I kept them in their home when my father was ill. But even at the end, she was saying, come and see us all. Come and see your cousin, and me, and we love you all. And
like it never happened.
Like
it never happened. And she wasn't sorry for what she did. So I call that, it's just delusional. And I can't meet up with that. It's just, they talk about that in politics too, when people want unity. No, I'm not going to side with your racism, your bigotry, your anti-human rights, beliefs. So I told her no. I was impoverished anyway. I didn't have a car and wouldn't be able to travel anyway. But upon her death, this was 10 years ago, and I might write my cousin a letter again this week. But my mother had a substantial estate because I built their estate. I worked hard all my life for them, and then my brother had died. My mother, brother, and grandmother died the same year, in 2009, 2010. And my brother had a sizable estate because my mother had given him $100,000 to buy hundreds of acres for his Christian ministry there in Washington State. And he was a lot like my ex-husband and other extreme fundamentals, and believed he was a prophet and exorcised people for demons, including me, and told me I was going to hell after my divorce. But when we were younger, before he went that direction, we were close. But I was given $1 from a substantial $250,000 estate.
I read that in your book that you were basically that your inheritance was, you got $1, right?
Yes, and I even have the check. I have a picture of it, but I found it. I never touched it. But I did write my.
That's worse than getting nothing. That's worse than getting nothing.
Well,
that's like.
She did that so I couldn't object to the.
Right.
my wealthy cousin, I'll say her name, Beverly Merkley of Walla Walla, Washington, and her husband. They're both well off and their children are grown. She got the estate and she had never taken care of my mother. I did for years.
Yeah.
And I took all the abuse. I took the rapes. I thought, what do you give somebody that was raped hundreds of times? $1. Well, yes, I knew her before. I was just mentioning this to your audience. There is in the 1980s a Child Abuse Accountability Act, and there was for a young girl that was raped by her attorney father, was able to sue her parents for not protecting her, for being predators in her life. So there is that law, but I could never, because I was poor, could never find an attorney to represent me. It's all admitted, even in letters, and everybody knew what was going on. So it wasn't a question, but I just knew, I want counseling. I want something for this time in my life that was taken. But those were what I learned through writing my book. And I might write Beverly Merkley this week because I've lived under poverty level since my divorce. It's taken a lot. I've been in court 50 times, legally stalked, sued for twice that I make for child support as a disabled woman, even living out of my car to my ex-husband. And it's taken about $250,000 just to get away from him. And even representing myself for the most of 24 years, just taking my life. I could never keep a job, but I just want to let her know there's times I haven't had car, I haven't had health insurance, medical care, I haven't had food. And I just hope you're good with this. And she's a devout Catholic in the Walla Walla, Washington community.
She won't feel any conscience
I know that,
about
but
that.
It's okay. I say we need to, put it out to the universe and put people on notice. You can just say.
What it would be is if your family had treated you with dignity, then it would have set up an even bigger conflict for them with what they allowed to happen to you. So by devaluing you and giving you $1, that made everything balance in their kind of crooked account books, right?
It was so I couldn't object to the will. If they hadn't given me something, I could have taken it to court.
Right.
It's pretty clear from your book also that this sort of dehumanization that you experienced growing up kind of set you up for your marriage. And it was your husband, Martin Warner, who brought you into the People of Praise group. Can you tell us about how you met him, how old you were, and just basically, if you think, how did your childhood make you susceptible to?
Oh, yes. Yes, definitely. And I believe that happens to most people. And it's, we're all on different journeys and our healing will take place at different times. And I tell people to be patient with your healing. There's no timetable. There's things I learned in my 40s that, boy, they might have helped me a lot when I was younger. I wish we had high school classes that taught about sociopaths, narcissism, psychopaths, rape, abuse, patriarchy, how it condones this type of behavior and ideology along with civics classes. Those would be great.
I often think that they should do sample dialogues to show how gaslighting works and to show how manipulators and how people, abusers and pedophiles groom children, right? And even high school girls, right? Mm-hmm. I think if they did the mock dialogues and the kids were exposed to how this works. But how did it work for you? What did he say to you? And what was it like when you first met him?
Well, to set up, my father was absent. I believe he did his best to care about me, although he didn't protect me. I'll share one note. I don't know if I shared it in my book, but why he cared about my uncle so much and loved him and why he ended up in our home a couple times. My grandmother had my father when she was 16 in Oklahoma, poor in a family of, I think there was 14 of them. I think her mother started raising my father. But my grandmother married my step-grandfather maybe when my father was 4 or so, but my step-grandfather was very cruel. I was at the end of his cruelty as a young child and severe beatings to where I couldn't walk. And then on top of that, at night, I'd be raped. But my father, one time, my uncle, Rishel, the murderer and rapist of me, saved my dad a couple times from his step-grandfather beating him with chains and whips. And You do. When somebody comes to save you, they become a hero in your life. And possibly for my father, without other education about these types of things, it was a blind spot for him, and he didn't protect me. So all of my family is guilty, really. But it's
part of the cycle of abuse, right? Because that bond where he saved him from his father now made him there's a personal loyalty, which means that he's going to turn a blind eye to
all that
other things. Yeah.
Yes. But, and my mother abused him in our family. She abused me. She protected my brother. He could do anything. And that was just male entitlement in our family. My father was absent a lot. And I do believe it's just a personal belief. Like I say in my book or anything, I say, eat the meat, spit out the bones. But this is just from observation that often some of our initial relationships are unfinished business of possibly very unwell or abusive parents. It's something you can't see often, but like a girl, if she's dating a young man, he's an alcoholic, but she thinks if I just do this, he'll stop that and treat me well because my father didn't. But my ex-husband was very much a personality of my mother in the same forms of abuse, same type of gaslighting, same types of cruelty, just different layers of it. But I was going to court reporter school, paying for it, and right after my graduation of high school in 1973, and court reporter school was in Portland, Oregon. I was in Vancouver, Washington. In 1974, if you remember history, there was a great fuel crisis. So I was riding the bus out of just save money, but a lot of the town ended up riding the bus. It was packed for months on end. And in the middle of the night, I'd get up and fill my dad's car with gas because he was a pilot and had to get to work. So I'd wait in lines for hours and then get up and ride the bus to my school. So there was a lot of people that usually never rode the bus on it. And it was packed, standing room only. And one time I got on the bus and I talked to Martin Werner, my ex-husband, behind me as he was talking to me. I think we eventually sat down when a seat opened, the only seat open, and he talked to me, and he knew my name was Kathy, but I didn't share my phone number or anything. And a week or so later, he arrived at our house in Vancouver, Washington. He was 6 years older, an engineer for CH2M Hill. And 6 years older is a lot. I was 18. But I did not know, I hadn't been allowed to date. I was just working for my parents, studying, flying lessons, court reporter school, all those things without a life and without much sleep. Just my mother's and my relationship was pretty much full-time and pretty intense. But I didn't quite understand what was going on. But he wanted to talk to my dad, my mom, and he was there. And I didn't not know how to get away from my own family, let alone him. That's just the basics. And
so he was basically coming in just kind of in a way like the old school, ask your dad if it was okay to date you sort of thing.
Sort of like that. He was wanting to chum me up with my dad. And I did not know I didn't have any experience. And like I say, I'd been brainwashed pretty much all my life and abused and not knowing a lot of things that were going on. I did not know how to get away from anyone. I just didn't have any tools. I had no mentors. I had no one to talk to, nowhere to go. And that was my life for many years, even after I escaped. No one to talk to, nowhere to go. Until in 97, I did have a mentor, Dr. Barbara May, who is still a mentor to me and was quite a huge help. She's a gift in my life. But up till then, it was always that. No one to talk to, nowhere to go. And so with him, what is this? What's going on? I had not a clue. And I believe there is. I wrote about it in my book. There's a red X on victims. And until you can get your land legs, until you can find out what went on, that red X is there. There's my mentors even told me there's a study done at Oregon State Penitentiary. They said, give us 5 minutes on the outside. We'll find every woman, man, with a red X on their forehead. They'll be great prey. And they do know how to abuse us. And so I think my ex-husband even knew. I think he knew. And he even asked me one time. It was shortly in the beginning, and I did not know. Like now I tell people, you don't have to answer anybody. In fact, I tell people I feel very open and safe with both of you. But sometimes people come up to me just as a stranger. They've maybe had bits and pieces of my book or heard about my life, and they'll ask me something incredibly invasive. Is, why do you want to know?
Right.
Not all people have good intentions. So for me, with him, I think he was a lot like my mother. I had no land legs from that, and I had no. I had never pieced my childhood. I knew a lot had happened, and I just kept getting up every day and doing the next thing that was expected of me. And with him, I wanted to get away, and yet I felt threatened. I did not know how to get away. That's about all I can put it. And I'd lost my voice. I had lost my identity as a 6-year-old girl.
Yeah.
But after the meeting of my husband, he continued to come and see us, and then it kind of ended up, I thought he was kind of a friend. I'd introduce him as a friend. I eventually met his family, which they're a lot like him. His older sister, Peggy Warner, ridiculed me and humiliated me from the moment I met her. And so I realized a lot of people are like that. There's a lot of people that are enablers of predators. There's a lot of people that are just cruel. In general, his family was Catholic. And so it evolved from after that. And then I did not know how to get away. And then I thought, I'm moving to Longview, Washington. I'm going to have a court reporter job there. And my mother didn't even want me leaving the home because she just looked at me as a slave to her. And so there was a lot of just her screaming at me and a lot of terror just in my life of just moving out and going and having a job. This was in 1974 or so. And then Marty Warner, who I was just in my life for 2 years before we got married, he moved his Oregon State University master's degree project from Oregon State up to Longview, Washington. And then he'd just be sitting on the courthouse stairs waiting for me to get off work. And it was just, my life didn't have any freedom. I did not know what that was. And I did not know how to say no to people. I felt threatened. And there's just many things I felt, but that I had a choice. There was many times I wanted to leave, but he asked me once too. He said, "You've been raped and molested as a child, haven't you?" And it was like, yes. I hadn't talked about that to hardly anyone, but he, till this day, would pry information from me, from others. That went on all throughout our marriage. Get into that later, but invasive. I'll say it was just very invasive. You'd call it stalking now. And then it actually ended up in a brutal rape in 1975 in Longview, Washington, at my apartment. I was shocked. And after that, my Christian fundamental friends and teachers say you're damaged goods, you've got to marry him. That was the mentality at that time. I know a lot of people can't understand that, but I know people to this day that believe like that. Even the cults I was through, not believing, not even thinking me as a victim, that I belong now to this man. And so patriarchy, to me, it's the crux of all of my ills in life. And I believe a lot of the majority of the society and the world's ills. And that I wrote a chapter in my book that how I became a broodmare and egg donor for the church and state.
Right. Hey, Coral, let me ask you this. So was in the beginning, was there ever a time during the relationship when things were good? Right. Was there like a golden age, like a golden, or did it just go right into the abuse? Because it sounds to me like it just went right into the abuse, like full on.
It did. There was I'll call it trauma bonding, even with my abusers. Trauma bonding. My great uncle who raped me would build sometimes a little playhouse for me. We were poor at the time, but he'd build something for me. And it was like, oh, wonderful. Somebody's done something somewhat kind. And then that night I'd be raped. It was really mixed up in my head. And nothing to put any good there for me. But I wrote in my book a great deal about trauma bonding and Stockholm syndrome. So if I can your questions, those were both going on in a huge way with my parents, grandparents, with Marty Warner, my husband. So Stockholm syndrome, there was a certain amount of, wow, it's not as bad with him as with my mother or great uncle or grandparents. Wow, I haven't been beaten. Maybe this is there was certain few things he would do that would create something where I felt like maybe he understood me, or maybe there was a little bit of safety here, but it was Stockholm syndrome. You're just thankful for, oh, I'm alive today.
Right.
Nobody's harmed me. I'm still alive.
Something struck me about what you said about the red X and about him asking you that question about whether you'd been a sexual abuse victim. And there was a moment in the show, The Keepers, where the young woman goes into the confessional and the priest asks her or she confesses to having been abused or whatever it is. And immediately, as soon as the priest found that out, he told the other priest and they marked her with that red X and they immediately started abusing her.
I believe that happens a lot in the Catholic Church. I believe it's a predatory criminal church, and I believe a lot of priests do that to young boys too. I know. I've gone to some of the SNAP conferences in Arlington, Washington, or Virginia, and met the detective from The Keepers. I recommend all your viewers watch The Keepers. It's one of my favorite documentaries, and it does resemble a lot of my life. It was very difficult for me to watch it. And due to watching it, I did go to a SNAP conference, the Survivors of Priest Rape. They have a conference every year, and the detective from The Keepers documentary was there to speak. And I just am very, I'm profoundly moved by how the documentary it mirrored my own life. And I do believe a lot of priests groom young boys that way in the confessional. Just even having them confess about things that young boys should not even, it's not the priest's business, but it is a way for the priest to groom them and to make them feel guilty about their sexuality. But Christian churches do this too. I believe they're both as guilty. And I believe it's just a place for a lot of predators. And a lot of people come up to me then and now, and they'll say, oh, I've heard your story, I've read your book, whatever. And they'll say, well, I go to a good church.
Right, of course. Oh,
and
God.
I'll tell you my answer to every one of them. I don't care if I've, interviewed a lot of the Marines, colonels. I've been around a lot of the military. I don't care who it is. I'll say, well, I was the woman in the back room with your pastor at your good church, and you would never hear about it. He mentally tortured me during my collapse and postpartum depression breakdown. I had a partial stroke. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. And he just mentally tortured me and called me names, accused me of witchcraft. And he was the one that helped my husband put me in a halfway house with ex-cons. But I've heard from many of his victims, because I have a book that people Google. They Google Bill Hurd's name, and I expose Bill Hurd and his wife, Linda Hurd. And I have heard from many, many of his victims, and he's helped many abusers get custody of the children and take them from protective, nurturing mothers. So I just say, hey, the Christian and Catholic Church, they're equal in my eyes. And yes, I've been abused.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit? Because I know this. Everyone has seen The Handmaid's Tale.
Yes.
Many people who are, sort of awake to what's going on in this country are familiar with fundamentalist Christianity and the hierarchical structures and all that kind of stuff. But what was the specific doctrine of this group? What does it mean to be a head versus a helpmeet? Were you ever called of Martin? Is that a language that they used?
No, not at that time. And I know the people of praise have removed that word handmaid since the Handmaid Tale came out. And the Handmaid Tale, she did write it from another cult, not the people of praise cult, but we were called handmaids. And I tell people when they ask what it was, I say, well, if you want to get it in a short couple sentence, it was all about the oppression and subjugation of women, period, full stop.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Alarm everyone that we have a Supreme Court justice that belongs to this cult and accepts that ideology. And that was that was what I belonged to. That's the ideology I had to accept. I had no rights, zero, none. And headship.
You mentioned in the book that that it didn't have to be a male head; there could be female heads, and
Yes.
that was interesting to me.
Yes, my husband was my head. He had absolute authority over me. I could not question it. I could not appeal it. I had to do whatever he wanted at all times. Then I also had a head that was a woman head. Her name was Connie Hackenbrook. For those 5 years, I was in the Corvallis, Oregon People of Praise community cult. And she had authority over me. And she would report me to my husband or to her head or my husband's head. She was called my handmaid. I was a handmaiden. So she was married to a leader in the community. So I suspect that Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett was most likely a handmaid at one time. And I said it, as far as the Handmaid's Tale series, my life was very much like that for 20 years. And I related very much to the series. Yes, our handmaids were in authority over us. My husband had a head, and that was authority over him and authority over me. I had a lot of people voicing, and then I was also checked up on by my husband's men's group. They would come at any time of the day to check up on me, and that was allowed. And I had a chart on the wall of every half hour, and when the laundry had to be in, the meals on the table, just everything, what meetings I was attend at what time. I had no time to my life, and that's how cults operate, to occupy. That's what patriarchy does to you too. So you don't have time to think. But yeah, right. That kind of authority. It was all about the subjugation of women, and that's all. That's all that it was about in a lot of patriarchy. That is really the basis of a lot of patriarchy. No matter how good or progressive your church is, that's how it operates. And it was in the extreme form. I tell people I got bored. I did watch the Handmaid series, and I could always tell my friends what was going to happen the next week.
Wow, that is so.
I knew that handmaid, after they took her baby away, she'd be on the bridge next week. Then they'd be asking the other handmaid to walk her out the bridge because they definitely needed her to breastfeed her child. But it was chattel. We weren't anything. We
slaves.
Had no, maybe I don't know. I'm sure not as horrific as slavery was, but in another sense, slaves. Yes.
Oh, absolutely. So this is what I want to draw this connection, and I wonder if you agree with this, because you talked earlier about we're talking about how people say, oh, my church is nice and my church is fine. But it's like, no. That is just a watered down version of the same fucking problem, right? And similarly, this is what I think about. I'm drawing the connection now between the anti-abortion crowd, right? Because that's also just a watered down version of that same kind of slavery, right? It's like, look, we're going to control your body. That's the bottom line. We want to you keep saying that. It's about controlling the woman. That's what it's always about.
And if I can go into another dimension of it, the KKK, they had wives. They had children. The wives were supporting the husband's lynching of Black men and women. There's always been women who have been supporting the patriarchy in whatever lighter or worse form it has been. Mary Turner, there were women and men there that hung her and ripped her baby out of her. There's horrific stories of that. But patriarchy, all the churches I was dragged through, the women treated me the same. It was no different. And I believe a lot of our ills of society is because women, even if they are like women like Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett, well, maybe she's a few higher rungs up in the cult than I was, but she's paying a cost. She's still a slave to them. She may have a few more rights than I do, but she is still costing me. Even for her, she knew what was going on while I was exposing the people of praise. So she was helping men harm me and target me, even Trump's attorneys and watchdogs. There was harm done, even with me having a voice, and she was a part of that. And so whether it be the KKK, white supremacist, nationalists, extreme forms of patriarchy, it's all the same. It puts women in that same place.
That's a really great point. And like it's always the theme is the same, right? If you from the Proud Boys to the KKK, it doesn't matter. It's always a sick combination of homophobia, patriarchy, and racism. And it's like, and really, it's about power. But power is what we're talking about here. It's always about power. Always. These are different permutations of the same problem.
And it's cruelty too.
And cruelty.
Oh my goodness. The people of praise. there was crimes committed against me, crimes. Cruel
Absolute crimes. I mean,
crimes.
Your book, we'll get into that a little bit later, but while we're on the subject of patriarchal women, I just wanted to mention the Mrs. America series and Phyllis Schlafly and the women. It was all women who were against the ERA, who were part of her group. And then there was the fundamentalist, I forget who it was, but she had a huge mailing list that was instrumental in Phyllis Schlafly's effort, and she donated her mailing list. And so the entire torpedoing of the ERA was because of women.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. The ex-husband has donated a lot of monies to Phyllis Schlafly, and there were many political women's groups he donated to. He was a part of that for years. Anything that was about the oppression and subjugation of women and anti-choice or pro-life. And he used to use our family. We'd go in front of the Capitol in Oregon, and he'd bring us to the pro-life rallies and line up myself and my children, even though I was being raped. I had no rights. And we were just lined up in the pews or at those rallies. And he was chairman of the Right to Life of Portland, Oregon. He served as chairman, and I am a victim of rape. It's documented. The judge and my ex-husband laughed about my rapes in court. It's on audio tape, so I write with great boldness and with a voice because it's all documented in audio tapes, and even he's proud of what he did.
We all knew.
Chairman of Right to Life is a rapist.
We all have known the entire time who these people are. Like I mean, whenever you see the Right to Life groups and how horrible they are and the way they harass women who are trying to go to the clinic and everything else like that, you know that there's all kinds of stuff going on in the background. But now to hear your story, it confirms what we all knew in general terms. And I want to talk a little bit about doctrine here. And I don't know, because there are specific Bible verses that talk about the wife submitting to the husband, but there's this Nicene Creed, which goes back, and I know that is something that's very big in the People of Praise group. Did that have anything to do with what happened? And I know there's two versions. There's one that includes Mary, and there's one that doesn't, and that might mirror sort of the doctrinal split between the Catholic and Protestant church, but did this play any role for you?
No. They're I believe mostly it's a crime syndicate, and most of them are narcissists, sociopaths. And
so it's not about doctrine at all.
No, they're Catholic. They're Catholic.
They're Catholic, right.
And a few Protestants, but mostly Catholic. The co-founder, Kevin Ranahan, is a deacon in the Catholic Church in South Bend. I met the co-founder, Paul DeSales and Jeannie DeSales. They came to Corvallis, Oregon, gave teachings. I met many of their leaders. I babysat their children while they were calling me mentally ill and poisonous. I was mentally ill, but I guess not so mentally ill that I couldn't watch their young children.
Well, a coherent stream of logic is completely unnecessary from that sort of mentality, right? Like, it doesn't matter. You can just make up things as you go along. As long as it involves cruelty and subjugation of women, then it's all good.
Yes. And that's pretty mind-bending. It's like I have good critical thinking skills, but I was so exhausted, a lot of sleep deprivation and exhaustion, and then just a lot of mental and emotional abuse. I call it emotional rape, too. People use all these tools against a human being. Even Father Charles Harris, he was from South Bend. He was a speaking in tongues priest that started in the 70s, this movement. So he moved to Corvallis, Oregon, and started proselytizing a lot of the young students at Oregon State University. He was a chaplain there, and that's how he got a lot of the young people, and they are now leaders to this day. That was back in the 70s, almost 40 some years later, but it appealed to their ego, it appealed to power. And any person that's connected, I feel they're just disconnected from myself. There is even a quote about the Holocaust that any of those guards, anybody in Germany, there is not, if you feel interconnected to another human being, there is no way you could ever do any of those things.
Right.
Thankfully, there was the resistance, not enough of them, and many of them were there's some of my favorite stories. I continue to read books and watch documentaries, but the resistance fighters, giving their lives for people they don't even know and dying for them. My relatives in Denmark were resistance fighters, and they were in their 20s, crawl out on ropes at night from their apartment because the Nazis were guarding them. They occupied Denmark. And I told them how brave. I adopted their last name, Theill. But I said, how brave of them. They got 5,000 people out in one night, so they wouldn't be murdered the next day. But when I said how brave they were, they looked at me and said, Coral, our neighbor was in trouble. And they're not religious. They're not religious at all. They're not Christian. But that's how I feel too. And I find that Christianity, there is a huge us and them mentality.
Mm-hmm.
The racism, it creates the KKK, it creates the bigotry, it creates all of the harm done against human rights. And I even noticed in the people of praise, my husband, ex-husband, along with the other men, there was another member that had a son that was gay. And they were so bigoted towards him and so cruel. And he went off to college, became a doctor, and he's in Corvallis, Oregon now, but he doesn't belong to the cult. But, behind him and behind his father, I heard such horrible things said against him. And so, but you're right. The whole theme is subjugation of women and the anti-choice, deeply involved in the people of praise.
Well, and you start to see how much they consider rape to just be a method of conception. It's just all about let's just pump out more kids. And so pro-rape, anti-abortion, right? More kids. So
exactly.
More members. And the children had to meet other members. Like I know many children to this day from Corvallis, Oregon, met members from South Bend, and they're married. I mean, the parents would meet almost, I don't know if it's arrangement, but the children didn't have a lot of a choice.
Right. It's a very tyrannical system. I feel even funny asking you this, but is there any charitable aspects or anything that this organization or these fundamentalist groups do for society whatsoever?
Well, they're very involved. They do use their power to get involved. They're very involved, like at St. Mary's Catholic Church. They're very involved in the church, but they believe they're the remnant of God and that the rest of them are lost because they're not speaking in tongues or doing miracles or prophesizing. So there's just incredible ego, arrogance, and ignorance all put together. And as far as my life, it was cruelty and abuse and harm and shunning and interrogations. I have so many examples I write in my book, and it's documented by witnesses and affidavits. So other people got out, but no, I don't see any good. And they were able to involve the whole community. I mean, the community thought they were a wonderful group. They all lived out in this several acres outside of Corvallis, Oregon, all together. Father Harris even lived out there, and people just thought they had these little prayer meetings, and we were all just a community of people believing in a similar goal. And many of the counselors in our community just highly praised them. Many of the store owners, the church, St. Mary's, endorsed them. So within the community, you couldn't go very far without finding other people who endorsed it.
Right. But I mean, charity, volunteering, doing projects for the community, helping poor people. Is any of that going on, or is it just completely self-centered?
Self-centered. They knew a poor person, they'd try to get them in the community to take whatever money you had left. We had to give the deed to our home. I had helped buy that home with my own monies, and thankfully
Wait, what? You mean you literally signed over the deed to your house?
Yes, we were the few that owned a home through hard work. But thankfully, many months later, the deal went through. It was to buy a really cheap apartment complex for the whole community or those who didn't have a home in the southern part of Corvallis, in a cheap area. The worth of it wouldn't have been much. And I objected, but I didn't have a voice. There was nothing about my voice. I mean, my critical brain thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to live in a tiny apartment with several of my young children and with everybody, neighbors all around, and no privacy, no yard. And why? Because the community says so, because the people praise leaders say so. But it fell through. But there were many incidents like that, and you did have to tithe to them. And I heard someone who knew the inside financial data of this community in South Bend. The leaders make an exorbitant amount of money from our tithes.
Of course they do.
Of course they do.
Of course.
Because you mentioned at many points in your life, and I want to talk about this later, but just briefly mention it now, that you needed medical care, and your husband said to you, "There's no money for medical care."
Right. he'd give money to the cult. He'd give money to other people that he wanted to. There was many cults he was in, but if they asked for money or people within the community, it'd be $1,000 here, $1,000 there. But no, he did not want me seeing my doctor. He wanted me having home births. And I did have several. I had a few home births to my detriment. And I needed medical care. But even just simple medical care, I have affidavits from people of seeing him deny me. Even when I was hemorrhaging after my twins, he denied me getting to see my doctor. And I didn't ever get to see or talk to my doctor alone. That was a rule and a law, or be alone with anybody else, medical professional, anybody else. I was to be home. And then as my daughters got older, they were to watch me and report to him. So
yeah. How did that happen? Like, how did it go to
naturally?
Explain how the process went to where you were alienated from your children? Because I mean, you're caring for them, you're their mother, and so how did it go to the point where they're informing on you?
Well, maybe I should go back to the People of Praise community cult. I will call them a cult because they meet all the data of cults. Even cult experts call them a cult. So those 5 years, I knew I wanted to leave the marriage. I didn't want to be around abuse. I thought I might go to hell. That's what everybody told me. But at that point, I thought, already in hell. I don't care. Already been there. So I wanted to get away, but I had no family. My brother was a fanatical religious person like my ex. So I didn't really have his support. But I had 3 young children, my twins and a son, Aaron. So I had 2 5-year-olds and a 3-year-old while I was in the cult for those 5 years. But the cult leaders knew of some of my, I guess, objections to their ideology. I asked questions, as a person should. And I was threatened by my husband and the cult leaders that if I left, I would not be leaving with my children, kind of like the Godfather movie. Oh, yes, you can go. The children will be here. And what scared me is I saw another woman get a divorce and she lost her 2 young children. It was just matter of fact. She was gone and the children were there with the father. And so I took those threats seriously. And every day of my life, I knew that in a 20-year marriage, he always said that if I tried to leave, I'd lose my children.
But I mean, you're looking to your children in the eye, right? And you're feeding them, you're bathing them, you're reading to them, you're doing homework, you're teaching them, all the things that you do. And how does that turn from there to being where you lose their loyalty and they're turned against you? That's what I'm interested in hearing you talk about.
Well, it happened one day, even in 1985. It was maybe months after we were forced to leave the cult because I wouldn't go back in. I wouldn't submit to the abuse of the cult leaders or the structure. And so we went to meetings for 6 months. I was forced at St. Mary's Catholic Church to sit on the floor outside of meetings. I was forced at meetings. But anyway, my husband was eventually forced out by the leaders because he couldn't get his wife in line. And that created him to be full of rage towards me. And then I, after that, left the Catholic Church that following year because all the people were shunning me in the community. All the Catholics in the community were shunning me. And we were going to a Lutheran school, all the Catholics there with their children there. My children couldn't play with them. They were shunning me, wouldn't look at me, walk away from me. And I just wanted to be. I didn't have anywhere to go other than I thought this is cruel and I don't want any part of it. But that created a lot of rage, a lot of abuse. And I tried one day to just go away to talk to somebody about getting away and just getting a divorce. And by the time I came home, my children wouldn't even talk to me, wouldn't even look at me. And they were just holding on to their father like I was some enemy that just entered the home. So it just took one day. And I realized it. It frightened me. I thought, oh my gosh, my children, I'm close to them and this can happen in one day. And that was deemed evil.
Kids don't miss anything. And of course, obviously seeing their mother sitting on the floor. I mean, they were there in church, right? Seeing you having to be forced to sit on the floor and treated with utter contempt and nobody wanting to talk to you. And then of course, he's pouring poison in their ear all the time. And so I can't imagine it. So how did this first manifest? What kind of things did they do to you after that?
Well, just treating me like I was less than. I think it was always that way. We were in our home, father was the head, the leader. That was just the way our home operated. And there was a habit I got into. I'm only doing this because your father demands it. I have to obey. And he'd be right there. And I just said, I'm only doing this. And that was my only voice. That was the only thing I could say. And it made him angry. But it was my one thing I'd be saying to my children. I do not agree with this. One time there was an ice storm and we were visiting his family. We had 3 young children. We were in Richfield, Washington, where his family was for the holiday. And the state police said, absolutely nobody on the freeway. It is just straight black ice. It's dangerous. There was nobody on the freeway except for us. My husband wanted to go visit his uncle in Portland, Oregon. So we got on the freeway. It was dangerous. And I didn't want to get in the car or put my kids in the car, but I was forced to. But that's just how life was every day, just like that every day. And then as my daughters became 8 and 9, I realized, they'd tell him if somebody called me, if somebody stopped by. My mail was read from him. My outgoing mail was read. Sometimes he'd sign my name on outgoing mail. Books he'd gathered, the Quiverful Movement, the Mary Pride books, any of his cult books. Christmas letters were put out that I couldn't keep up with all his cults, but my name was put on them. But I don't know if you want to go back to the People of Praise cult. I can share a little about the crimes that were committed against me. And
well, I wanted to talk about your relationship with your kids, because that's the most tragic part of this whole thing. Because
yes, it is.
And a lot of your kids are grown now, and I'm wondering if you're in touch with any of them, or if you've spoken to them, or how that relationship. It was destroyed, obviously, but has there been any rebuilding at all?
Well, to get back to the basics, I was not deemed a human being in my home, and my children saw that, even though I was tender and a protective and tender, nurturing mother with them and fun mother. I mean, even Senator Betsy Close kids, and she even wrote me a letter saying my kids they're sad when I pick them up. They want to be with you because you play with them. You have time for them. So I was a nurturing mother with my children. I did play with them. I loved being with them. They were my joy. And through the years in the community, the People of Praise community, I had 3, but I had actually 11 children, lost 3 children, miscarriages, DNCs, and then 8 living children. At the time of the divorce, they were nursing infant to 17-year-old twins, so all minors. And every day of my marriage, I was threatened he'd take my children. I'd get nothing. You're welcome to go. And that just kept me there until I broke down in 93 after my home birth with no medical care on my 7th child, Hannah Rose. I didn't do well at that birth. And my husband just went back to work. I hadn't had sleep. We had moved to a farm, and homeschooling, no sleep, pregnancy, remodeling home, doing my husband's work in the middle of the night. He'd get sleep, so I'd answer his work phone calls from Hewlett Packard. So I was in bad condition by the time of my birth, and hemorrhaged, and was told to get up, get dinner. His father and wife and people were coming over to dinner that night. So get dinner on the table and wash out your bloody sheets. And then my children all had the flu. And so within 6 months, I called my doctor secretly, Dr. Charles South. He was the one that helped me eventually get away. But I said, I believe I'm dying. He said, my name was Kathy then. He said, Kathy, you'll get through this. You'll get through this. And I told him wasn't allowed to see him. My husband would say, we don't have money. He had a $250,000 estate at the time. And he'd be given thousands of dollars to other people, but he wouldn't allow me to see my doctor, who could have helped me. But I was suffering from severe postpartum depression, which is normal, from hemorrhaging, no sleep, large family work, no rest, no support, and cults and abuse. So 6 months later, I thought I had the flu. I couldn't pick up my baby. And I asked my daughters to come help me. And I thought, I'm just weak. And it just tumbled from there. I thought I had the flu, and it was just a tumbling of a incredible physical collapse to where within months I could barely speak. I couldn't bathe myself or dress myself. And then from that period on, my ex and all his cult leaders and friends would exorcise me for demons regularly, tell me I was a witch, that I was cursed, I was a Jezebel spirit. I hadn't learned how to submit to them, to my husband. And my mother would call, tell me I hadn't learned how to submit to her. So she would tell me, this is what God does to you. God's punishing you. And so that went on. And then my children picked up the same refrain. If you just confess your sins, Mom, you could be our mother again. You'd be well, but you won't do it. And then Bill Hurd, the pastor Bill Hurd from Mosburg came in. He was trained by Bill Gothard Institute the Bill Gothard Institute from Chicago, who many children have been raped in his institute. And I was dropped there in Chicago to be reprogrammed. So dropped there, and they told them to fix me, and I was forced to scrub toilets. And I was in that same condition, could barely move, could barely dress myself or speak. And I was exorcised for demons from their staff every day, told I was a witch, forced to watch all of Bill Gothard's videos, followed by high school girls. And there was one day I thought, if I don't get out of here, there was all of me was still here. Who I am talking to you was there in 94 when I was in Chicago. And I just am thankful for my critical thinking brain that worked even when it wasn't working. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to die here. I couldn't call it brainwashing what they were doing or abuse at that time, but I just knew I needed to get away. I had no money. I had probably enough change to get a taxi ride to the airport. No driver's license on me. I may have had I don't think I had a driver's license. He took everything. He just dropped me off because he and his Baptist pastors thought that what I deserved. Break me. So I go to the airport. I get I get the girls that were following me. I finally was able to get out a door. They didn't see me. I got into a taxi and got to the airport. And I told the airlines, I said, my ticket should probably be online. I don't have it on me. And at that time in 94, you could do that, not now. But I went back to Portland, Oregon, and I then went and stayed with my brother, who was extreme too, exorcised me for demons, but he didn't beat me. And I felt a little safer not being at Bill Gothard Institute. But a lot of the people of praise cult leaders and members have gone to the basic Bill Gothard Institute. And I started going to them when I was 16 because a lot of my teachers and students in high school would invite me and go to it. And I didn't know anything else. I was Lutheran at the time, but that was just being preached a lot, this umbrella protection, all this headship. So it just emerged into Catholicism, cults, my marriage. And it was a very painful time during my collapse in 93 and 94, and I was repeatedly beaten. I was raped. I was pregnant twice during this breakdown, which is against the law in all 50 states since 1993. If you're mentally incapacitated, helpless, if a man rapes you, that is rape, no matter if it's a husband, whoever it is. And in 99, I did file rape charges in 2 different counties, and both district attorneys thought of it as nothing and just dismissed it and said they didn't believe a jury would, have convict a husband of rape. But I write about it extensively in my book, and I write in my book that the worst place to go to is a church, Catholic, Christian, any patriarchal institution. If you have been raped, suffered domestic violence or child abuse, molestation, they will blame you, they will shame you. And there is thousands of articles on this, many books, and all experts say this, that's the last. Don't even go there. And I've received thousands of letters at my personal Facebook page, Bonshia, Making Light of the Dark, from women every day, and 100% of them have been abused or further victimized by the church, Catholic and Christian. So that is my message to the end of this day. And if people don't want to believe me, I have 20 years of letters and communication in person. And this, I'm just afraid my children operate Christian ministries, and they have supported my husband and helped him further harm me in court and personally. They were nursing infant to 17 at the time I left 25 years ago. They're 25 to nearly 41 now. And they have even gone to court with him. They even read a hate letter to me. And you asked me about my children. For nearly 20 years, I was their mother. I even did visitation every other weekend or whenever my ex and his mother would allow me to. And I was sexually assaulted on his property. I was abused. I was verbally abused, emotionally abused. I'd sometimes take a tape recorder and just punch it and say the tape's on, and it would stop it for a few minutes. But I, after 2 years, thought I have no different life than when I lived with them. And when I would see my young children, they'd scream and cry. When I'd have to drop them off, they'd tell me and my friends the abuse they were suffering. My friends wrote their phone number in their shoes. I realized I couldn't protect my children. The judges and my attorneys had told me I couldn't speak about my husband's abuse. And so we live in this patriarchal society that just diminishes women, diminishes us protective mothers, and nearly 1 million mothers, and I will just honor them this moment, have lost their children through family court all around the world, but in America. And we are very concerned about the mothers losing their babies at the border, and we should be, but they don't care about us. And Senator Jeff Merkley, I met with him in 2014, gave him a copy of my book. His assistant, who had been a battered divorce attorney for battered mother, Joel Corcoran, had contacted me, had read my website articles and said, you need to write a document for Senator Merkley. Tell them about your 20 years of court abuse. And I did. I spent a whole summer. Then I met with Senator Merkley at his office in DC. I had no car, so I had to get there by lots of different means. It was hard. I went there and met with him, gave my book, gave the document, never heard from him. But in 2019, he was the first man at the border for those mothers of lost children, and continues to write about them to this day, and has not a word for me, no help. And my case is documented as one of Oregon's most horrific domestic violence and rape cases in Oregon history. He knows that. His staff knows that. There's no help, and it's like business as usual. I've been in 50 court cases.
It would involve challenging the entire power structure, and if you are a product of that power structure, it's like that's not how it's going to work. I don't know if there's not an off ramp. I mean, we talked about this earlier, but Trump was just acquitted again in the Senate today,
yes.
And they couldn't manage to hold him accountable for that. So
they're all predators.
This goes from top to bottom.
Yes. And you did ask me about my children. Of course, when they were taken from me, the judge in court, I did seek safety. I got well finally after my collapse in 93. I was impregnated during that collapse, which is rape. But 5 months along in January of 1995, I woke up, kind of like that Diana Ross movie, Out of the Darkness. And she had suffered a breakdown, but 18 years after a breakdown and living in a mental hospital after she collapsed in med school, she woke up and went back and got her doctorate degree. It happens to people. It happens to military personnel, lawyers, doctors, all kinds of people. But I woke up 5 months along and I realized, oh my gosh, I've almost lost 2 years of my life. I've been exorcised for demons. I've lived in Portland, Oregon in a halfway house with ex-cons, rats and lice. I've been harmed greatly. Get away and get safe. And that's very difficult in those kind of situations. You have no friends, you have no people. If you come from an abusive family, no family. But I did get well, and I stayed in the home for a year before my divorce, and was teaching my children and being in the home every day. I was well, other than I knew I'd be dead soon. And my doctor, Dr. Charles South, said that to me. He said, he told me to get safe. He said, you go get the best. And he used some words I can't say, attorney you can find, and divorce the words I can't say, your husband. And I then sought on a path to calling friends from my past, people I knew when I was a court reporter in Longview, adopted mother, Addie Archer, so I could go see attorneys in secret during the day with my nursing baby, have people helping and knowing what I was doing. And when I finally did it, of course, there's no help in the court systems. Of course, the judges overturned my restraining order. Of course, all the churches and pastors and church congregations supported my husband and helped him take my children from me. All those things happened. But people did come out of the woodwork. Women, my husband, who had abused in the workplace, helped hide my van at night with their husbands. People put me in motels under other names because the Polk County sheriffs were after me, because my husband and his attorneys wanted them to. I did escape with my 3 young children after the restraining order was overturned. I was put back in the home with my predator husband and his mother and my adult daughters and his church members, everybody watching me. And so I got a lock on my bedroom door and a different phone line. And I knew I couldn't live like that for 7 months. So I did escape, and I do believe the judge punished me for it, but he did put me in hiding. He agreed for me to live in hiding because neighbors and friends and doctors testified for me. But in court in 1996 in March, we had a 5-day hearing, and he said, I've already decided to leave. It was Kathy then, Mrs. Warner, her young 3 children with her young children. I have 6 doctor reports. She's taken 6 psychological tests by some of the top psychiatrists and doctors, psychologists in Oregon, many of them who had seen me just once during the time of my collapse, but never saw me again because my husband would not let me see a doctor alone. But they were just, I was still alive. But I lost custody of my children, even a judge telling me he was leaving the children with me. But the whole case was about my postpartum depression. And I said, well, that was 2 years ago. They laughed about my rapes. They laughed about my breakdown. They laughed about the rapes of me as a child. That became part of testimony. So any woman who is going to go to court, be forewarned, it'll be a witch trial. And they used to just burn us centuries ago. And now you just go through family court forever. And many of us, we end up living out of our car, which I did for 3 years. We're sued. We're legally stalked for the rest of our life. And we don't really have a life, but we're alive.
Well, I want to read an excerpt from your book about this family separation, when the final point when you lost your youngest baby. Okay. And you write here.
I have a picture of my youngest baby, Zachary David Warren. He was a nursing baby when he was taken from me at 6 months old.
So you said on March 10th, 1996, I was forced by an order of the court and by my ex-husband, his attorney, his family, and religious supporters to do something that raged against my good conscience, my common sense, and against all my motherly instincts. After a temporary custody hearing, a court order signed by Judge Norblad forcibly removed my nursing baby and 2 youngest children from me. I obeyed the court order and gave my children over to my ex-husband. I drove to the hospital, rented a breast pump, and later collapsed and went into shock. I could not understand what had happened and why. I have not yet recovered from the shock. Perhaps I never will. So this is horrifying to me. And I mean, I was gonna talk about Christoph's and my cult story on this episode, but what we went through is just pales. I mean, it was nothing. You know, our cult was led by my mother, who, you know, because she was a woman. This kind of stuff did not go on in our cult. And so, you know, I've known how severe things could get in Christian communities, because I've talked to other people who've had some experiences, not to the extent of yours, but it just, if anything, reading your story made me feel how lucky we were to grow up where we were, in a relatively comparatively sane environment compared to what you went through. So just, I mean, I know that you've said so much, and I don't know how much more there is to say, but what was that like, losing your infant?
Well, I prepared myself for it. The judge that they did judge shopping, finally the 7th judge was Judge Alvin Norblad, and his father had been a governor. He had been a judge for many years, but he was known as the hanging judge. He was horrific to youth. Sent him to McLean, which was in a very abusive youth center. And
excuse me, pardon me. I don't want to, but what was, I want to hear about your experience when this happened, and this, you know, I know the court system was horribly unfair, but this is your child that you're, you know,
well, like I say, because of the cults and because I live in a patriarchal society, I prepared myself for this. This is what they threatened through the whole family court proceedings. And, I got a call. I was with my brother. We were at his cabin in Oregon, and I was with my 3 younger children, and we went to a phone booth because my attorney wanted me to call him. It was 10 days after the last court hearing, and my brother then came with the news that there had been a judgment from the judge stating he had taken all 8 children from me, even though he had put me in hiding, agreed to me to be in hiding for months with my children due to danger, knew about all abuse that my husband had done to myself and my children. He had laughed with my husband about my rapes. So it was a really cruel court proceedings and all. But then finally, when I was told, I just went screaming through the woods. There was a howl that came out of my body that I'd never heard before. And it's come out of my body since then, when I'm just overwhelmed with grief and horror. It's a soul murder, again, of my being. And there was nothing wrong with me. I was nursing my baby, protecting my children. And I passed all these psychological tests, which even those in court and the attorney said we couldn't even pass most of these either. And I just was in shock. And then I knew, well, if I try to run, I'll just be arrested, put in prison. There's no choice. I just got to obey. So I obeyed, and in shock, went and got the breast pump, and then was at a friend's house that night. And two women slept in front of the doorway at this house because I was on a breast pump. It wasn't working. I kept getting up saying, I need to go get Zachary. I need to go get my baby. And they just kept telling me to go back to bed. And I was in shock for several weeks and did see a doctor, a therapist who eventually violated HIPAA laws and was abusive. But the courts ordered me, because they knew they'd probably put me in shock, to see a doctor. That wasn't very consoling. He wasn't very educated about domestic violence. And so it was just me. And I just went and started looking for jobs because I couldn't live. I had no money. And so I was just expected to go get a job, and went and hadn't worked for 20 years, even though I had a background of court reporting, pilot training. I got a hostess job, my first job. I think I was paid $5.50 an hour. And then I got a job at a warehouse, lifting and loading trucks, unloading trucks at Target, and worked 80-hour work weeks, saw my children once a week when they allowed me to. Most of the time, he and his mother wouldn't allow me to. I had court order for phone contact once a week, but my mother-in-law, Helen Warner, who helped take my children from me, who lied on the stand, telling the judge I had dropped a suicide note once when I was picking up my clothing. She had always hated me, and the children had been raped under her care, and my own children got raped under her care when I was ill. So she was instrumental. The church was instrumental in taking my children, but went and did all I was supposed to do, and it wasn't easy, and continued having to go to court. And every step I took was very hard. My children would talk about abuse when I'd see them, and I'd get harmed when I'd pick them up. So 2 years later, in 98, I decided, no, I need to get far away from them. And my mentors told me this, that my children were being harmed because they loved me.
Well, this is when we talk about radical secularism, this kind of vile conduct where the church is literally cooperating in taking a nursing baby away from its mother's breast.
Yes.
This is what we're talking about. I mean, even though these things are crimes are committed against you, crimes are committed against your children. Your children were forced to become complicit in crimes as they grew older. It's meaningless to have those laws if the state grants some kind of de facto religious exemption for churches and cults. And I also want to talk about this from a standpoint of hierarchy, okay? Because here you are, right? As long as you stay within the patriarchy, you're able to be in, your husband's beautiful home that he has and have your 8 children and the picture perfect life. But as soon as you disobey, now you're cast into warehouse job, hostessing, working 80 hours a week, living in your car, right? So this idea, they almost consider being poor to be punishment, just punishment.
It is.
Which is why you're never going to get laws in a country that is hardcore Christian like this. They're never going to really help the poor.
No. And my children are glad that I'm being harmed. In fact, you asked me about my children now. We were close when they were younger. I was close to my children as much as you can be in that kind of environment, but I enjoyed them. They brought me joy, and I did everything I could within that environment. I even put my body in between theirs to protect them from their brutal father. I did that time and time again. My older daughters were treated more as surrogate wives. As far as reporting on me, he'd give them diamonds, he'd give them a car, he'd give them, $75 to go get their hair done, where I wasn't allowed any money, no haircuts, couldn't talk to a friend, couldn't see my family. Even in the cult, people praise cult. My father was dying. He was in emergency care one night, and I was not allowed to go see him in ICU the night he died when I was in the community cult. And I was thankful they let me go to his funeral. Some of the community cult people praise cult people came to my father's funeral, but they didn't look at me because they were shunning me, but they were there for my husband, who was still trying to stay in the cult. So it's been a bizarre life. But patriarchy, I tell people there's a lot of women and the mothers of lost children. There's a lot of women that we've all written a lot of us have written books. I do want to mention one of my friends. She also agrees with all of us about patriarchy. And she wrote Nothing But My Voice, Donna Bocio, Nothing But My Voice. But we both talk about that. That's all we have left is our voice. And we will write and we will speak and we will meet with senators, representatives. But she also was harmed in the same way. And we both agree that patriarchy, we're not a part of a lot of the Mothers of Lost Children causes, because many of those women are fundamental Christians who are also racist, who are also bigoted or anti-rights against other human beings, or they're against the ERA. I cannot work with women like that. I can't. Patriarchy, until patriarchy is changed, there will be no change. It's just all a joke. As long as until patriarchy is upended, this is what it'll be for women. And a lot of women have written me from Oregon. And I told this to Senator Jeff Merkley and even his assistant this year, Jessica. I said, I get letters from women in Oregon who are battered, who have been victims. And they write me and said, I've read your book. I've read your story. I'm going to stay in this violent relationship because I do not want to end up like you, Coral.
Oh my God. That's just, it's terrible. And it seems like all these organizations that they have for children are just so they can get new converts. That's the only thing they care about, children, is just to have more. It's the quiverful idea.
It is.
For sure.
Yes.
But we're really coming to the end of our time, but I wanted to talk about your last year. You were going to testify, or you wanted to testify at the Senate confirmation hearing for Amy Coney Barrett. And of course, they should have heard from you, because now all of America has been saddled with this judge for life, right? What were you going to say? What would you have said if you had the chance to testify?
Yes. And I will mention to your viewers that they can go to my website of coralanikatheill.com, and the first link, and also at my blog, there's this 5-page letter to all the U.S. senators and the Judiciary Committee that I wrote and sent to on October 8th. And they received it. I have an email that they received it, but they wouldn't allow me to testify. Senator Lindsey Graham made it very clear that nobody was going to testify. And Senator Sass and Senator Ernst, they all talked about this person in the news, which was me, a couple others. But I was interviewed. I had 20 interviews. I was in the AP, Guardian, Political, Newsweek, Reuters, Paris, France, two interviews from Paris, France. So it was all over the news from September to October, and people were writing me and reading my book. And there's even reviews at Amazon of people saying, I found this book by Googling, Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett, and I am alarmed. And because there's so much documentation in the book, and I have witnesses. I told the senators, there are witnesses ready to testify. Even Dr. Paul Hesberg, Sr., he lives in Washington State. He witnessed the crimes and abuse. But you want me to read a few of the...
you could just give us the highlights, because we'll put the link in the show notes and anybody can go read the whole letter. But I just thought, if there was just some high points or low points, as the case may be.
Well, I just shared that I would like to testify at the confirmation hearing of Judge Amy Coney Barrett as to the oppression, abuse, and crimes that I and other women were victims of in the People of Praise sect, to which Amy belongs. Although men have ultimate authority in the sect, women leaders like Amy are complicit in the subordination and mistreatment of lower status women like me. And the entire time I was there, I was under the control of men and subjected to psychological abuse, including undue influence, threats, shaming, and shunning by leaders and my husband. Coercive persuasion was used on my children to turn them against me. My husband and the community leaders used coercive control, isolation, intimidation to strip me of my personhood, safety, and freedoms guaranteed to me as a United States citizen. They also launched a smear campaign when I finally got courage to leave. The actual crimes committed against me were marital rape, false imprisonment, kidnapping, and illegal interrogation. Though these were crimes at the time, I believe these crimes are still occurring in People of Praise communities and need to be investigated. And I was told I had to obey my husband, who was my head. I was required to be a helpmeet, which is the biblical term for a wife's duty to help her husband do whatever he wants, whenever he wants. This was the main reason my husband wanted to join the group. I was forbidden to take birth control and was even accompanied to my husband to my OBGYN appointments. I was required to submit to my husband's demands for sex at any time, even immediately after birth. My husband could rape me at will, and that was fine with the leadership. The most serious crimes committed against me while in the People of Praise were continual marital rapes. Each week, I was forced to endure headship meetings with my husband, who would correct me and the children. He would remind me that I was to set an example for the children by obeying him in all things. And this was a direct correlation to how they would respond and obey him. My husband reported to leaders in his own headship meeting any comments I had made that questioned his absolute authority. He kept a black book and listed each and all of my infractions. I was required to tell my innermost thoughts to the leaders and emotions to women leaders called a handmaid, who reported what I said to the male leaders and who then reported them to my husband, who could then correct me at our headship meeting. One example of oppression I endured is that after my second miscarriage and DNC surgery in the spring of 1984, I was required to attend the mandatory People of Praise Women's meeting. I was still bleeding heavily and was weak from surgery. The women wished to go shopping on a shopping excursion that evening. I shared with them that I would be unable to go shopping with them and walked out of the meeting. The handmaid of the women's group, Connie Hackenbrook, immediately called my husband and reported my disobedience. My husband called another member, Bruce Burning, to watch our 3 children. And as soon as I arrived home, I was forced into a car and driven to the home of Ed Brown, my husband's head. He told me that some people like me couldn't cut the mustard in the narrow walk with Jesus Christ. I told him I was tired and wanted to go home, but it was only after several more hours of interrogation until the wee hours of the morning I was finally allowed to leave. Because I was brought and kept at Ed Brown's house against my will, and he used insults and threats during the interrogation, I believe this fits the crimes of kidnapping and illegal interrogation. The next day, the members of the community were instructed to shun me, not to speak to me. I was considered poisonous and a danger to the community and well-being, but still forced to attend meetings and women's retreats. Shunning is a cruel and humane practice within many church groups and cults, a form of silent ridicule. My crime? I was disobedient to the leaders.
Wow.
I'll go and list the many crimes that were committed. And I said, I believe crimes and the abuse against women are being committed systematically and methodically by the people of praise under the cover of religion. But this is not about religion. It is about power men are given to keep women under their control. I have witnesses who can corroborate my abuse and know former members who can give written testimony and perhaps in person as to the abuse and subjugation of women in the People of Praise sect. The confirmation hearing should include this testimony. I would very much like to testify to the Senate in person, as I believe the public should hear firsthand about Amy Coney Barrett's support of patriarchal ideology and resulting oppression of women. This should be a disqualifier for the highest court in the land, respectfully. Anyway, I recommend everybody read it, and I'm going to be republishing my memoir this spring and including this along with other documents about the cult.
Wow, Coral, thank you so much for being with us on the Radical Secular. You are tough as nails. I so wish that you'd been able to get up there and testify. You're just an inspiration to all women.
I'll keep speaking. And also, I hope my children find this video someday. I hear I have 10 grandchildren or more, but like you asked me about them, they've written me hate letters in the past, told me I'm a tool of Satan, and he'll throw me away like a dirty dish rag. And these are children in the Christian church running Christian ministries, Baseball Northwest in Oregon, and they go to many of the court hearings I've been subjected to, supporting my abusive husband and supporting him suing me into more poverty. So I hope they find this, and I hope someday they get counseling outside of patriarchy and our secrets.
I hope so too. I mean, it seems to me like what I would most wish for you is that some of your children could see the light and you could have a relationship with them, at least some, or maybe even your grandchildren, right?
That is correct. I don't know. You never know what will happen next. Or I know I met a lot of people in Oregon that knew them. I get letters from people that knew them as of recently, as of last month, and they walked away from this extreme fundamental Christianity and are concerned for my children. But it's been a sad journey. But I have used my journey to write many articles for the Marines and the Wounded Warriors, and I do advocate work for trauma survivors and Wounded Warriors I've written for Leatherneck Magazine on racism and PTSD, TBI, suicide prevention. And I now serve on the board of directors of the Montford Point Marines of America, Incorporated. And I just continue to hope to be a light and to be a voice. And I hope to talk with you all again.
Thank you so much, Coral. You really, like I said, you really are an inspiration. I mean, if I needed any more reason to keep fighting and supporting strong women like you and fighting patriarchy, this is truly an inspiration. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you for doing this.
Christoph, wow. That was a tough subject. And I'm just frankly super angry that this nightmare is probably still being repeated for thousands or perhaps hundreds of thousands of American women living in religious cults and abusive relationships justified by their religions. I know you have thoughts.
I sure do, Sean. I sure do. That was a really powerful interview. A couple things come to mind is, first of all, just the strength of that woman, the strength of the human spirit, but particularly this woman. This woman she is lovely, just lovely and warm and beautiful and thoughtful and smart and she's an author and all these and she talks about these unbelievably difficult sort of ideas and problems and patriarchy with a combination of compassion, but also but not detached, right? It's not like clinical, but it's like it's personal, but it's also very loving and open. So anyway, great conversation. I am fucking infuriated. I'll tell you what, that's the second part, right? The first part is like, oh my God, this woman's outstanding. What an amazing woman. The other side of this is like, I couldn't be more committed to what we're doing here and why we get up and fucking do this all the time. This is exactly the story, right? And all of the societal structures that allow this to happen, right? Because most people aren't in those kind of cults, but there is an entire society structure that allows this to happen and gives it a fucking pass. And that's what's infuriating. That's what radical secularism is all about, is dismantling that kind of cover that these organizations get.
Absolutely. I mean, this is a part of the American Civil War, which is still going on. I mean, we see that the same hierarchical structures that allowed slavery are still going on. I mean, there's modern slavery in for-profit prisons, and there's slavery within homes for women. Right. And it's just like, and that's not even all of it. Like, we could just go on and on with the reforms that are needed, and all of it has to do with justice, bringing justice into these situations that are hidden and that are denied, and just bringing them to light, bringing accountability and justice, which is going to make the people who are perpetrators scream and howl, and they're going to call it cancel culture. And they are experts at this. Okay. They are literal experts holding women hostage through their own children.
Unspeakable, Sean. It's unspeakable. And people say stuff to you, people like you and people like me. Oh, take it easy. Why?
Relax.
Well, relax. Everybody relax. But this is why you don't fucking relax. This is why we don't fucking relax, man, because our eyes are open. We see what's happening here. We refuse to turn away. We refuse to turn away. And this woman refuses to turn away as well. She refuses to turn away. And this woman has found her voice. And I am honored that we were able to help her and support her in her journey.
Yeah. Well, no unity with racists, no unity with sexists, no unity with rapists, no unity with homophobes, no unity with transphobes, no fucking justice, no fucking peace.
Exactly.
All right. Well, if you like our show, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, check out theradicalsecular.com, tell your friends to listen. New episodes post Mondays at noon Eastern on YouTube and at all the major podcast channels. And if you're into reading, check out the blog at theradicalsecular.com. I'm Sean Prophet. Thank you for being here. And remember, wherever you are, you can be radically secular.